I am autistic, but that's not my superpower. My superpower is not giving a fuck about being marketable or popular on YouTube. I mean, look at me. I've been doing this 20 years and I'm as happy as I am unpopular. Do you think I'm losing sleep at night because of all the total strangers that aren't watching my videos when I have tens of dozens of people willing to watch me prattle on about esoteric nonsense? Nope. Good times. Hi, I'm Super Train Station H and welcome to part 9 of Barrier Aggression, my critical analysis of select materials from Autism Confidential, the National Council on Severe Autism's podcast series, where the president of said organization doesn't just hand me a shovel for me to dig a hole for our arguments to die in, she hires me a steam shovel and a crew to operate her for me, all while I passively spectate and daydream longingly about the steam shovel's sturdy treads and nice shiny scoop, and wonder to myself, if she likes bird watching, and whether she's refined enough on her anthracite preferences to distinguish between Welsh and Pennsylvanian coal. You know, because I want to impress her on her first date. I mean, what? I like steam shovels. I can't be the only kid out there who had a crush on Mary Ann, right? I mean, look at her. She's got a nice neck. Wow. My partner at work's gonna get jealous of me. Watch her have her gearbox failure tomorrow just to spite me. And to think people who don't know me don't say I'm autistic. Wow, this is getting pretty strange already, but the president of an autism advocacy nonprofit is about to use a side character in a fictional TV show as proof that high-functioning autism doesn't exist in real life. Now that's weird.
And that does do a disservice to those who have, I guess, more classic or more true forms of autism.
I have to agree. So, that's exactly the issue, the classic definition of autism. I don't see a problem with some people identifying their differences or labeling themselves neurodivergent. It's fine. We all have our little quirks and our little differences, and that's fine. However, the use of the word autism, it's taken to the extremes because we need it for policymaking, for accessing services, for accessing education, and changing, presenting this as some, neurodivergence. That is such a simplistic way of represent what we see. There's so many of the people we serve that will never be able to even understand what a word doctor is. So that is what the conversation should be about. If we are going to define this, or if it's defined as a spectrum, then allow the middle of the spectrum to move and allow the both extremes and the ones that are in the middle to be able to have a voice as well. Do not dominate the conversation, because that is what bias is. And, that's something that we don't talk about enough in this kind of articles like the Spectrum publishes. It is the bias. You are absolutely writing all these documents with the bias that autism is something that is just a difference. And that is not what we see in the population we serve. So this bias and this extremism on both sides of the spectrum has to stop to really be of service for the population that we serve.
So I'm curious, you guys, you've had long careers in medicine. How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
None.
It's pretty clear that Jill specifically expected or even coordinated that reaction so as to validate her ignorant talking point that the concept of a clinically diagnosed autistic person serving as a doctor was inherently absurd and detached from reality. It's especially ironic for Jill to use the limited personal experiences of her doctor pals to justify erasing autistic doctors from existence, when 10 minutes ago in their own podcast, Jill was the same person complaining about the mere presence of high-functioning autistic people being an erasing, marginalizing force that was silencing lower-functioning autistic people by stacking government committees against their interests. By the way, the IAC, the government organization Jill and Dr. Wachtel said suffered with a roster that was stacked with a marginalizing force of high-functioning autistic people falsely claiming to be autistic in the first place. Fewer than 13% of its roster described themselves as autistic in their official committee bios at the time they made that statement. One might guess that a interagency autism coordinating committee roster that had even a 1% rate of its members describing themselves as autistic would have been described as a supermajority to Jill and her two doctor pals that were somehow dominating the non-autistic percentage of the roster. The point is, for people who seem concerned about some autistic people literally conspiring to suppress the visibility and struggles of other autistic people, the National Council on Severe Autism itself, at least in this podcast episode, sure is eager to lead a discussion in which literal fictional evidence is used to discredit the mere existence of specific subpopulations of autistic people who the NCSA deems valid targets for laugh-out-loud ridicule that should be subject to hour-long public indignation meetings. I again remind everyone that the National Council on Severe Autism is supposed to be an autism advocacy organization and is registered as a non-profit that solicits charitable donations from the public. If I personally were the parent of a high support needs autistic child that might be considered severely autistic, who will need help with everything they do and do not do for their entire life, and I had zero stake in the challenges unique to higher functioning autistic people, if I, as such a parent, donated money to the National Council on Severe Autism, only to find them broadcasting themselves promoting ridicule and distrust towards higher functioning autistic people, and in doing so, discrediting any public policy initiatives they could influence to serve my child, better secure their future, and guarantee them better conditions, I personally would consider any amount I would have donated to the NCSA to be wasted. But that's just the personal opinion of a non-parent who crushes on powered industrial equipment and whose odds of even considering an attempt at reproduction are even smaller than that of the XLO token's value rising to 1/100% of 1 United States cent. Now, what is the XLO token? Well, according to an AI spam bot that invaded my gaming stream on Twitch, it's the inflation-free, non-legal tender digital currency of the future, or some shit.
Tempo sana la ilo nampa sina ken alasa inampa pona pimani ilo exelo tokin mani li ilo ni li mani ilo pi ilo nampa ikute ala e lipo lawa pima ale li kana ala ike tan tempo li pona tawa mani ale ante.
Sammy!
Sina wili ala pona e sina ma ante.
So this bias and this extremism on both sides of the spectrum has to stop to really be of service for the population that we serve.
So I'm curious, you guys, you've had long careers in medicine. How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
None.
The one in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
What the fuck am I watching? How the fuck is this even real?
The one in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
I'm not offended. I'm just amused, bewildered. Like, I've genuinely had dreams in which it turns out that the podcast from the NCSA that I'm responding to never existed, and somehow I was just confused and mistaken this entire time. But no, this is actually real.
So I'm curious, you guys, you've had long careers in medicine. How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
None.
The one in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
Jill, you uttering those words in that moment makes 0 sense. And I'm not saying that those words make 0 sense because I don't like them or because I disagree with them. or because it's wrong. Even though I don't like what you said, and I disagree with what you said, and what you said is wrong, those are just coincidental details in this moment. I'm saying that you uttering those words makes zero sense, because not only do they do nothing to advance the point you think you're making, but it makes you, well, it exposes you as a silly dumbass that'll say anything if you think you could weave it into something you could use to the advantage of your agenda.
How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
None.
The one in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
How I feel right now, in the midst of critically analyzing this moment, it's like, I feel like I'm playing a 1v1 soccer match with Jill, where she took control of the ball and just inexplicably started scoring points in my favor by repeatedly shooting the ball into her own goal. It's like all I could do is take a seat on the benches and watch my opponent aggressively disadvantage themselves by intentionally scoring points for me.
How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
None.
The one in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
I don't think Jill thought the implications of this podcast episode through before she approved its publication. I'd go as far as to say that she got so excited with the opportunity to complain about autistic doctors that she didn't even review this footage before she posted it or approved of it being posted. Because you know, Jill, when you record video of yourself saying things, and then you order that video to be published for the public to watch, people are going to actually watch the video, which you apparently didn't plan on happening. Jill, do you remember when you said this?
It was a miraculous, wonderful thing that somebody like my daughter was depicted on the big screen. There was no damage done.
But now you're saying this.
So I'm curious, you guys, you've had long careers in medicine. How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
One in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
Jill, I'm starting to doubt that you even care about real life. And when you've created a situation in which a cartoon dog is concerned for your regard for actual reality, you know you fucked up.
I mean, listen,
I'm listening.
movies are works of fiction played by actors who are not really the people and do not necessarily have the backgrounds and conditions of the characters they are portraying. Well, they had a character who looked just like my daughter. Are you saying my daughter makes autism look horrible? It was a miraculous, wonderful thing that somebody like my daughter was depicted on the big screen. There was no damage done.
Let's get this shit straight. So Jill thinks that a fictional movie depicting a high support needs, aka lower functioning autistic person who requires perpetual assistance in their daily functioning is fantastic for giving appreciated visibility to such autistic people, and that in Jill's own words, it was a miraculous, wonderful thing that an autistic person like her own daughter was depicted in a mainstream piece of media, and that it lends validity and credibility to the existence of autistic people like Jill's own daughter.
They had a character who looked just like my daughter. Are you saying my daughter makes autism look horrible? It was a miraculous, wonderful thing that somebody like my daughter was depicted on the big screen. There was no damage done.
However, if an equally fictional, low support needs, aka higher functioning autistic character is depicted on a television show serving as a doctor,
How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
One in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
Somehow that proves how absurd an autistic person in a respected career could be in real life. You know, no matter how much I don't like Jill Escher, that is some amazingly stupid bullshit. And I'm doubting Jill's intelligence to the point where I don't even think she could take being told that she's wrong about this without interpreting it as a declaration against the legitimacy of her children's diagnostic profiles of autistic traits and resulting disabilities. I mean, this is so fucking stupid. In fact, I almost don't feel like it's fair to Jill at all. I almost feel like I'm cheating somehow in bringing this up. I almost removed this entire section from the script of the video you're watching right now. But something about this just did not feel fair to me, to Jill, because for a while I felt sincerely guilty when planning out how I'd describe or draw a comparison between these two different clips of Jill talking about autistic fictional characters in media, because I started to feel like I was taking clips of Jill speaking from completely different recording sessions made months apart that depict totally different discussions, and that I'm splicing them together in maybe a dishonest way, as though they were from the same podcast episode that was discussing the same topic. And I felt like I was doing that in a way that was dishonest and made Jill look hypocritical and foolish. And I really thought about it for a long time until I realized I was right. These are two completely separate recordings from months apart that were edited together to make Jill look hypocritical and foolish. That is exactly what was happening, hence why I felt that something was wrong, hence why I felt that something was unfair. Except I didn't do that. Jill did. On purpose. Jill herself has taken clips of herself speaking from completely different recording sessions made months apart, which depicted completely different discussions, and spliced them together to present them to the public as the same podcast episode as part of a singular discussion topic, in a way that makes Jill herself look hypocritical and foolish when consuming the podcast as a single piece of media. I mean, even as someone who presents themselves as a rabbit-eared cartoon dog alien that has a giant purple and black parasitic worm that lives on their tail, this is too wacky for me to make up.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Autism Confidential, the podcast from the National Council on Severe Autism. I'm your host, Jill Escher, the president of NCSA. And today we're doing something a little bit different. As you know, this is mostly an interview format podcast. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about a news item, and then I'm going to share with you a recording that was made probably a couple months ago, but got kind of bumped because we had so many other things in the pipeline for this podcast. But it will be followed by a discussion with Dr. Lee Wachtel from Kennedy Krieger Institute, and she's on our board. Most of you know who she is. And her esteemed colleague, Carmen Lopez Arvizu. Dr. Arvizu is the medical director of the Psychiatric Medical Health Program at KKI. So today, the theme is the word autism. Right. I'm going to just talk a little bit, and then again, we're going to go to Dr. Lopez Arvizu and Dr. Wachtel talking about the word autism and the insanity that has become the word autism.
Very poor choice of words.
So with that, I'm going to stop blabbing, and I am going to have our wonderful producer, Lee Syatt. Everyone, shout out to Lee. Thank you, Lee. I'm going to have him plug in this older discussion about the word autism and the trivialization of it, the meaninglessness of it, with Dr. Lopez Arvizu and Dr. Wachtel. Thank you, everyone. I'm going on vacation next week with my beautiful daughter.
There you go. Jill, president of the NCSA, specifically asked her editor to splice these two recording sessions together. Even if these quotes about Jill's stance on the validity of depictions of autism in fictional media were from separately published videos that were posted months apart, it wouldn't be wrong for me to point out this double standard, but I would have pointed out that her opinions might have changed between the filming of those two videos. But in this case, Jill ordering them to be published as part of the same video suggests that she holds both of these contradicting views simultaneously. It's explicitly hypocritical and biased for Jill to believe that fictional media depictions of autistic people that resemble her children and need constant invasive assistance to function give legitimacy and visibility to those people's struggles.
They had a character who looked just like my daughter. Are you saying my daughter makes autism look horrible? It was a miraculous, wonderful thing that somebody like my daughter was depicted on the big screen. There was no damage done.
While also believing that fictional media depictions of autistic people having careers and functioning independently proves how absurd such a notion could be in real life.
How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
One in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
It's not like I'm digging through years of Jill's videos and blog posts to find something she said in 2013 I could pull out like, gotcha, a decade ago you said something totally different in a different conversation at a different point in your life that I can now present out of context to make you look silly. No. This is from the same podcast episode. And I did challenge myself as to whether or not I'm using these two quotes about Jill's depictions of autism on screen in a dishonest or out of context manner. But the two statements surrounding these points, they were on topic to the level where Jill went out of her way to make sure that both of those clips appeared in the same episode in spite of being filmed months apart, a podcast episode that was supposedly themed around the trivialization and decay of the word autism, which Jill went on camera to explicitly explain herself. And Jill's main argument, proving the decay of the word autism, is her dissatisfaction with the fact that clinically diagnosed autistic people exist who can do things that her own two children will unfortunately be unlikely to ever possibly attempt themselves. Now, regarding the contextual differences between the two examples, the only apparent difference I can see in those two examples is the example Jill approves of and calls miraculous involves the depiction of someone she sees as reflecting her daughter's characteristic profile of autistic traits, and the other involves a high-functioning autistic person working as a doctor, which Jill has constructed in her mind as an inherently hostile act against her daughter somehow. I would call that bias, but bias is bad and the NCSA is good, so there's no way the president of the NCSA could be biased. But Spectrum News running an article about high-functioning autistic people, now that's what bias is according to the NCSA, who are good and not biased.
Do not dominate the conversation, because that is what bias is. And that's something that we don't talk about enough in this kind of articles like the Spectrum publishes. It is the bias. You are absolutely writing all these documents with the bias that autism is something that is just a difference. And that is not what we see in the population we serve. So this bias and this extremism on both sides of the spectrum, we need to start talking about bias and to make sure that we share that with everyone, that there needs to be more inclusive opinions, that there needs to be inclusion of opinions that might not be necessarily supportive of your theory, but that we need to have a conversation and a civilized conversation, not when one of the parties is afraid to speak because being afraid of being your career destroyed, because that is the reality of things. People are afraid to talk.
I know there are going to be people who will respond to my criticism of this podcast by accusing me of being senselessly bitter that my experiences as a high-functioning autistic person aren't at the forefront of the National Council on Severe Autism's attention. I'm not criticizing the NCSA podcast in this sardonic, pissed off, irreverent manner because autistic people like me aren't at the forefront of NCSA President Jill Escher's attention. I'm doing it because autistic people like me are at the forefront of the NCSA's attention, and their president is using their perceived position of authority to go around making shit up, saying that people like me don't exist, while laughing out loud at the idea that we possibly could exist in an article where we're talking about our struggles. Now, online vigilantes looking for disability fakers already are using messages from autism attack moms like Amber from Buck Angel's podcast, and like the ones in this NCSA podcast, to validate themselves in hunting down and bombarding autistic people, including clinically diagnosed ones, with threats and hate messages, including people who are known to have been clinically diagnosed in early childhood, and who have significantly higher support needs than me, people who the host and guests of this podcast might consider people they are specifically concerned with helping, were they to read a black and white copy of their diagnostic paperwork, but who they would dismiss as self-proclaiming neurodiversity warriors who are falsely autistic when encountered behind the alienating barrier of the internet.
And that does do a disservice to those who have, I guess, more classic or more true forms of autism.
Remember everyone, screens are not windows. Screens are barriers placed to obscure and filter windows, and to keep things from one side from interacting unimpeded with the other. That includes the screen you're watching right now. So if you happen to agree with me that these NCSA panelists are full of shit, you should probably ask yourself why you feel that way and examine the sources that I'm commenting on to make sure I'm not making shit up. So, let's continue.
How many doctors have you met who you would diagnose with autism?
One in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
The one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
And you know, one of the things is that maybe there are there.
Oh, maybe there are? Maybe autistic doctors might exist? What would autistic doctors need to do to prove that they exist? What if they got together and were interviewed in a fucking online news article about autistic doctors and how they're being stigmatized for their diagnoses? Would you believe it then? No, somehow I doubt it. In fact, I bet you'd present the first 9% of that article in a sardonic, misleading manner, and then use it as proof that these people can't possibly exist in real life and are just out to steal attention from people with real disabilities like your children and patients.
One in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
The one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
And you know, one of the things is that maybe there are there, but that has nothing to, you know, that's not a label that I would care about.
Wrong. It's a label you definitely care about. You're so fixated on it that you're participating in a 40-minute long public indignation meeting over how upset you are over the idea of autistic doctors being even discussed in the first place. You responded directly to an account of an autistic doctor, Dr. Tahil Javed, sharing their personal experience of being clinically diagnosed with autism by saying that it's wrong for people like her to self-identify their little quirks and differences as autism. Dr. Javed specifically said that she was clinically diagnosed. And then you said that quirky people like her wrongfully using the word autism was interfering with actual autistic people accessing disability support services and special education, as though your natural assumption is that high-functioning autistic people with neurodevelopmental diagnoses, obviously therefore don't need access to or are naturally ineligible to benefit from special education and adjacent disability support services, even though people of that exact description have been receiving those services and depending on them to attempt to integrate with the non-disabled world for the last 30 fucking years, going back at least to the issuance of the DSM-4 in 1994, back when people in their 50s now were only turning 20, and mobile games looked like a Greek mosaic that got puked on by the ancient demon Pazuzu.
I don't see a problem with some people identifying their differences or labeling themselves neurodivergent. It's fine. We all have our little quirks and our little differences, and that's fine. However, the use of the word autism, it's taken to the extremes because we need it for policymaking, for accessing services, for accessing education.
So yes, Dr. Lopez Arvizu, I would go as far as to say that autism is a label you care about.
One in, what was that, Grey's Anatomy? There was one.
Oh, the one on TV.
Yeah.
The TV doctor, right, who doesn't exist in real life.
And one of the things is that maybe there are there, but that has nothing to, that's not a label that I would care about.
Right, so
I
what
care
label?
about, a physician that can take care of my medical needs. I don't care about anything else. Whatever label they might have. If they have autism, okay. If they have social anxiety, I don't care. What I care is that they are able to deliver adequate medical care. That's all.
So, Dr. Lopez Arvizu, you don't care if someone's autistic or not. You care whether or not they can provide proper medical care. If I were to believe you on that, which I don't, but if I were to pretend that I believed you, all I'd have to say is, that's nice. Well, guess what? It turns out, Carmen, that a lot of people do care about that, sadly. A lot of people don't respect physicians once they learn that they have clinically administered neurodevelopmental diagnoses. It turns out that some doctors with autism are even stigmatized for having that diagnosis.
Doctors with autism speak out against stigma. All right, so never mind the fact that neither of my children even understand what a doctor is. But, they use doctors with autism. And many hide their diagnosis from their colleagues because they worry they will be stigmatized.
So even if I were to find it to be true that you, Dr. Arvizu, were sincerely absent of bias against autistic doctors, and would judge their work as physicians based on quality and not their personal diagnostic background, the fact that you are actively contributing to a 40-minute-long public complaint session denouncing autistic doctors who have endured unfair treatment due to ongoing societal stigma against autism and other disabilities. At best, it shows that you have failed to understand how your actions negatively impact others. Well, that does it for Part 9 of Barrier Aggression. And wowee, we only covered about 2 more minutes of the podcast episode. The NCSA sure is efficient and jam-packing this episode of their show with the S word. What is the S word, you ask? And what about the S word, Adcon?
The S word, a word denotating rectal pestilence.
Rectal pestilence.
You see, H, the S word, is like the sequel to food, but it's a sequel that always is worse than the original, because it's doo-doo feces.
Okay. In other words, the NCSA is full of shit. Boy, oh boy, if you aren't familiar with the background info on this podcast episode in the way that I am, this sarcastic, irreverent tone must make 0 sense to you. But stick around for the 19 remaining installments of Barrier Aggression still to come, and sooner or later, you may understand. I'll see you all in Part 10 of Barrier... No, actually, fuck that. Fuck that. I can't keep this up. Jill, you edited yourself saying explicitly contradictory and hypocritical things about the validity of autism depictions in the media. Why should I even carry on at this point? You're really practically making these videos for me. You caused me to have dreams where I repeatedly, have a dream where I think that none of this was real and I was just elaborately mistaken. Then I wake up and find out that this unbelievably fucked up and confusing and strange podcast was actually real, and I actually have to say something about it. At this point, Jill, actually right now, as I was sitting down filming this video and finishing up the recording session, I realized I need to stop taking you seriously if I'm going to finish this video series within my own lifetime. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I scripted out and proofread more than a dozen hour-long additional videos of this series, leading on from the point in which I broke down the remaining, 20-ish minutes of this podcast that I haven't discussed explicitly yet, nearly to a sentence-by-sentence level, just to debunk nearly down to the atomic level all the misleading, incorrect, or illogical bullshit that you and your doctor buddies say in this podcast. But it's not worth it, at least not in that format. I mean, why should I waste my time explicating how full of shit you are when you go out of your way, Jill, to edit explicitly contradictory and hypocritical statements you made on the same idea in different recording sessions into the same podcast for me, to make it as obvious as possible to anyone paying the slightest attention that something's wrong with you and your organization. Now, in general, Jill, all you've really done in episode 39 of your stupid-ass podcast is promote just undeserved enmity, distrust, contempt toward innocent autistic people whose only crime, aside from speaking about their personal experiences of difference and disability, was being able to attempt careers that are out of the reach of your equally innocent autistic children, who never should have been used as props in this manner, and that nearly pisses me off more than anything else you've done. There are other things you've done that are so terrible I can't talk about it till I'm closing out the podcast, because if I talked about them now, they'd be so fucking distracting that I couldn't talk about anything else. But I really could only imagine what a possible conference call planning session between Jill and her NCSA panelist partners from the Kennedy Krieger Institute might have sounded like. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall for that phone call.
I know you don't have anything to give. Don't you understand that it's only a pretext? Shut up and listen and do as I say. Here's the plan. I want you to place something valuable in her purse while she's in your house picking up the package. We have to make everything look real so she won't be suspicious. Wait for an hour and then call the police. They'll find the missing item in her possession and bingo, they'll arrest her. She'll never make it back here.
Now, to be clear, that was not footage of Jill Escher. It was just a clip from an entirely fictional cartoon. It's a cartoon that I remember because my parents rented it for me, I think just one time in the very early 90s. I remember being a little kid and seeing this cartoon and thinking how crazy it was that even a villain in a cartoon could be that sneaky and mean. I reasoned, as a small child, that no one in real life could possibly act that strange and mean. But no, people that strange and mean actually do exist, and unfortunately Jill Escher is one of them. A person that, in a very slightly better world, would be objectively impossible to dislike for being the president of an autism advocacy nonprofit, and one at that that's focused on promoting the needs and public understanding of those most significantly disadvantaged, most significantly isolated, most significantly understood, most significantly stigmatized by their traits of disability. Now, Jill, I really don't know how you managed to create this situation for yourself. You didn't just paint yourself into a corner, you nailed yourself into a fucking box. This is the most unobjectionable humanitarian cause that you could possibly attach yourself to, yet you found a way to be spiteful and full of shit in every possible dimension of your approach to serving as a champion for autistic people. I mean, you're like a reverse alchemist, Jill. You're like someone who turns gold into lead. And not only do you do that, but you take video of yourself doing it, post the video of yourself doing it, then you just glare indignantly at the lumps of lead in your hands and complain that some insidious agent on the other side of the world has stolen your gold and wrongfully turned it into lead to make your life miserable. Meanwhile, the person in question just goes about mining their own gold from their own mine, while remaining entirely unaware of your existence as you curse them from stealing from you and from your children. Now, I guess all that is to say, I'm just not going to take you or your friends seriously, at least not quite in the way that I have, for the next several videos. I'm still going to cover a lot of the silly things you and your friends might have said, but I'm going to take a far less detailed approach for the time being, as to the extent that I can, while still covering what I think needs to be covered. Because I still think it's important that someone highlights how awful you've been in regards to autism advocacy, and that's the only reason I started this project. No, actually, why I started this project was something entirely different. this is just what the project turned into, because I started this with very different intentions, Jill, that I bet you'd never fucking guess. So yeah, I'm not taking you seriously for now, Jill, or your friends. I will be doing that again, closer to the end of my series, but when that time comes, when I take you and your friends' actions in this podcast more seriously and cover it in more detail, I imagine that you're gonna wish I didn't. It's gonna seem very hard for people who've watched the series to this point to see the next several videos from me and think that I've significantly cut down on the amount of material I was covering, the amount of material I was breaking down, analyzing, and explicating, but I will. So I'm actually going to call the episode here, because next time I'm just going to focus on one of your doctor buddies, just one of them, and all the strange things they've said, and I'm going to have as much fun as I can get away with doing it. So I'll see you all next time in part 10 of Barrier Aggression, and thank you all very much for watching. Hey y'all, I just wanted to pull the curtain back even further for a minute. I'm not kidding. I'm not being sardonic or sarcastic or trying to be funny when I say that I think there's something seriously wrong going on with episode 39 of Autism Confidential. The fact that the back half of that episode was recorded months before the first 15 minutes, it's like, I mean, Jill herself says it. They recorded this, and either Jill or maybe Jill's podcast editor or someone, for whatever reason, decided not to publish the recording until months later. I mean, it could have just been just because they decided to keep the podcast to an hour format, and the recording about the doctors with autism article and how upset they were about it, that was only 40 minutes long. So Jill maybe adding the solo bit about Sia at the beginning helped pad it out and make it ready to publish in their hour-long format. But I personally speculate, like I just wonder, not based on anything specific, but did Jill, maybe Jill's podcast episode editor, someone else at the NCSA, maybe who listened to this recording session between Lee, Jill, and Carmen, maybe they were aware of the full context of the source material they were discussing? Maybe they decided that this is something that shouldn't be published. Maybe Jill herself decided not to publish it, and a few months later, maybe she forgot why she decided not to publish it. I mean, the fact that Jill makes explicitly contradictory points about the validity of discussions of, I guess, fictional autistic characters in mainstream media between the two recording sessions made months apart that make her look like a huge hypocrite, that maybe suggests that perhaps Jill forgot some of the details of the earlier recording session when Jill recorded her opening Sia diagnosis discussion that she had made into the intro to the podcast. Now, one way or another, I'm guessing that just based on a dumb hunch, but I feel like there's some kind of weird behind-the-scenes story that we'll never know about how this podcast got recorded, how it got assembled, what decisions were made before, what discussions were maybe had after about its editing and its release. I mean, part of the reason I'm like, I guess has to be over 10 hours into discussing this hour-long podcast episode from the NCSA and all its surrounding moving parts. I mean, I just have to warn everyone, this shit is going to get really fucking crazy and unbelievable to a point where I personally would not trust someone I didn't already trust discussing the things I will later be discussing if they didn't go into as much detail as I am here over the comparatively less important aspects that I've discussed up to this point. I'm not kidding when I say that explicating episode 39 of Autism Confidential, this discussion about the Spectrum News article concerning autistic doctors facing discrimination, this whole thing is the craziest project I've ever gotten myself involved in, and if I understood what I was getting into when I started the project, I flat out would not have done so. My greatest fear with my project in Barrier Aggression is that I might somehow accidentally discredit the fact that high support needs autistic people, including those whose profiles of autistic characteristics describe them as having little or no ability to engage with autistic self-advocacy, are people who are severely overlooked, even within the context of autism in general, which is still severely misunderstood, severely underdiscussed, severely stigmatized, especially when those characteristics of high support needs disability happen not to be palatable or marketable in a way that's tasteful to put on a poster or run on a PSA to drum up donations. Anyone associated with the NCSA, anyone who's dedicated money or volunteer work hours, anyone from a neighboring organization that's provided your organization as a platform for NCSA leadership personalities like Jill Escher. Anyone who wants to advance the prospects and public awareness of low functioning, aka higher support needs autistic people, but doesn't approve of Jill Escher's mobilization against relatively higher functioning or higher support needs autistic people, as seen in this podcast episode. I don't want you to fail, but I just want to say, it might be the case that you should maybe consider serious reforms to your organization, even if it takes some kind of mutiny to do so. Or perhaps maybe take your volunteer work hours, your charitable donations, your friendly cooperative platforms working towards autism education and awareness, focusing on those with higher support needs. Maybe take that somewhere else and be rid of the garbage, the baggage that Jill has brought to this cause. Now, I'm taking a calculated risk that I could see some people in the autistic community disagreeing with. That I might be teaching, accidentally, people with a grudge against high-functioning autistic people how to avoid being seen as obviously messed up and sneaky like Jill by explaining this. I'm taking that risk onto myself because I believe sincerely that most of the people involved with the NCSA would not approve of Jill's behavior as has been displayed to this point in episode 39 of Autism Confidential. It might not seem like it, but the only reason I got involved in what turned into Barrier Aggression, this video series, was specifically because I wanted to raise awareness and understanding of the work done specifically to help high support needs autistic people. I don't want that work to go to waste because of people like Jill having spiteful personal problems. I'm not asking anyone who isn't already to become a neurodiversity proponent. I'm just asking you to take a really close look at Jill's choices, her actions, her words. Because this shit she's doing is not good for any disabled person of any description. Be well.